Good morning, everyone. It's October 31st. Thank you for being here today. Before I get into the story, I just want to say my usual stories are not about the paranormal. However, one of my first videos ever, I did post about the unusual happenings around my area. It didn't dawn to me that it's all connected until a few months ago when I was talking to a relative who knew people, places, things, and I put it together. So with that information, I'm putting together a video, and I thought it would be appropriate considering it's October 31st. These are real things that happened to me. This isn't just a mythical story, but the reason I'm sharing is because I really do want input on this. I am not a believer in ghosts, but I do know what happened to me. I have my glowing eye cat mug full of chamomile tea to calm my nerves. I hope you enjoy watching this. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a seat on your lovely couch, and let's begin. As I mentioned, I did post a video about the odd and strange, bizarre happenings that have occurred in my area. I thought I would follow up today because it is October 31st, and I thought it was fitting. First of all, I want to share something that I didn't put in that video. Behind me, you can see a rock, a tree, and some ledge. Beyond that is darkness and woods. At night, this area becomes so spooky that last night, as I was coming out to film this, because I thought it would be cool to sit with the backdrop of the woods and put like a flashlight on myself, I couldn't do it. I was too afraid. Nothing scares me, okay? I just want to put that out there. I am not a scaredy cat, but the darkness here does make me a little afraid. And I want to just explain why. A few years back or so, I came out one lovely morning to have my coffee on the back porch, and I saw a huge coyote. We have had problems with coyotes in the past years. They've kind of dwindled down and I don't hear or see them as much, but this one particular incident was this huge coyote, and he kind of ran through my backyard here. And then he ran up over the ledge. And what then I saw next were two dogs chasing him. And I thought that was kind of comical. Like, oh, the coyote is being chased by two dogs. I thought it was silly. They were big dogs. They weren't little dogs. I recognized one from my neighbors. And the reason I recognized it is because one time the neighbor was opening their garage or something, and the dog bolted out of their house, ran off, and went missing for a couple of weeks after bolting into these same very woods from up yonder there. And I helped them search for the dog, and it was in all the papers. This is a very small town, so everything makes the papers. When that happened, a lot of people were looking out for this dog, and eventually the dog was found. He was actually wandering around a shopping plaza. So I became familiar with this dog. I had flyers so I knew what the dog looked like, and, the dog became kind of famous around here. But that particular day with the coyote, that dog was with another dog. I naturally assumed that the people got a second dog or had a second dog that I wasn't aware of. Even talking about this is giving me really creepy vibes. So when I saw the two dogs, I called my neighbor and I said, hey, just to let you know, your dog just ran through my yard chasing a coyote. I didn't know if you were aware of that, but is that your other dog too? And the owner of the dog said, what other dog? And I said, the dog that's with your dog. And to me, because it was looking kind of up there on the ledge, it looked like like an older beagle. Okay, so I was like, it looks like an older beagle to me. And the owner said, we only have the one dog. I said, oh, well, do you know if any of the other neighbors have a beagle? And he started naming the other neighbors, like, we know everybody, so that's how this town is. And he was like, they don't have dogs, they have cats. And I was like, oh my goodness. Well, somewhere, somehow, a little beagle got involved in this and has been chasing the coyote with your dog. And we got a good chuckle out of it. We didn't think anything of it. And he was confident that his dog would come back just safe and fine. And sure enough, about 5 to 10 minutes later, his dog resurfaced out of the woods perfectly fine, no coyote, no beagle, and his dog ran back through my yard and went home. That always stuck with me though, and I was like, well then whose beagle was it and what happened to the beagle? But I never saw on any online forum around here. We have Neighborhood Watch, we have online forums that talk about people's lost pets and so forth, and nobody knew of this little beagle. The animal control people didn't report any little beagle missing, and that always puzzled me. One of the reasons why is because when I first moved here, I had a little beagle. His name was Snoopy, and he passed away, and I buried him here. And that's just one example of the oddities that go on in this area. I didn't connect it at the time, and I didn't think it was the dog's spirit chasing the coyote, but after you hear the rest of the story, you may come to that conclusion as I did. So after a while, I thought, well, I don't know what's going on. It's, goes along with all the other weird stuff in here that I've already put in the other video. But then something really strange and spooky happened that made me wonder if this is all related to the stories about the Appalachian Mountains. I'm not from that region. In talking with my relatives back in around July, before I even ever started my YouTube channel, it came to light some things, and I was able to connect the dots, so to speak. So let me share the story with you, and let's see what you think about it, especially if you're from the Appalachian Mountains. I want to know what your take is on this, because it does creep me out. I'm not going to sit here and say it doesn't. It really does creep me out. So basically, when I was a kid, I lived with my grandparents, and my cousin was visiting. My grandfather was a farmer, so my grandmother canned all of the vegetables that he grew. And one particular night, my cousin was over, like I said, and my grandparents said to me, hey, go down to the cellar and get us a can of tomatoes, and when I say can, I mean jar, okay? And get us whatever else was down there that she needed for her homemade spaghetti sauce. And that was my favorite meal. So I was really looking forward to this spaghetti dinner. And I was really super excited because my cousin was over. We went together to the cellar, or otherwise known as a basement. We went down there and we grabbed what my grandmother said she needed. Nothing out of the ordinary. There was a light. It wasn't spooky per se. And we switched the light off and we started walking up the stairs. I heard a noise, and I was in front of my cousin. He was behind me as we were walking up the stairs. Now, the stairs were two sets that made an L-shaped. They were all cement, and down below was the cement floor of the actual cellar or basement. And as we walked up the L top part of those stairs, I heard a noise, and I turned around and I went like this, and I looked, and I saw, at the time I thought it was a real person, okay? I didn't think it was an apparition or anything like that. I saw a man laying on those stairs. He was in denim jeans. He had a sweatshirt. I can't recall what the sweatshirt color was, but he definitely was wearing jeans. If I remember correctly, the jeans were cuffed at the bottom. He also was reaching up his hand like he had fallen and slid down that L-shaped stairwell and was reaching up for one of us to help him out. His face was marked. It was all marked with streaks, and his hands were the same. His clothes were filthy. I screamed, and my cousin whipped around. He's like, oh, and we both bolted up the rest of the way, and then we ended up going into the kitchen without even shutting the door behind us that led to the basement stairs in the first place. And when I got into that kitchen, I explained, because my grandfather looked horrified, and I said, there is a person laying on the stairs. And I was shaking. My cousin was shaking. We were horrified. I was approximately 10 years old when this happened. I had gone to a church function one Wednesday night, and we were supposed to memorize the names of the people sitting next to us in a circle. I wasn't really liking this game, so when it came back around to me to remember the people who were sitting on either side, I couldn't remember. And the person hosting this game tried to put charcoal down my face. So that's what it looked like, what this man had on his face. She was going around this church circle and putting charcoal on people's faces, and that's what I remember it looking like. He had these streaks down his face, and he had them on his hand. So to me, it looked like somebody that was maybe trying to start a fire outside. I didn't know. I was 10 years old. I was a kid. My grandfather jumped out of his seat, ran down the stairs, looked throughout the whole entire basement, found no one. He checked to make sure the basement door was locked. He didn't have an electronic opener back in those days. He just had a manual door that you had to lift. He didn't see anyone. He didn't hear the door lift up. It was locked from the inside. So if somebody had gone out the basement door, there was no way they could have locked it after leaving. So that didn't make sense. So he thought we were just imagining things. We were kids. It couldn't possibly be anyone that we actually saw. We were just scared because it was a basement. And I was like, no, what we saw was real. Like, I actually thought it was a real human being laying there. It wasn't see-through like you see in the movies. After that, I kind of kept the incident to myself until one day, when my grandmother was passing away, I was looking out my kitchen window while doing dishes, and I saw a man, a completely different man. And at this time, this was about not quite 20 years ago. But I was an adult, in other words. I was looking out the window, and I saw this man standing in the yard, and he had a railroad suit on. That's the best way I can describe it. It was white overalls, and he was wearing a blue and white pinstriped hat, like you would see in a movie with a train conductor. And I looked at him and I thought, oh, he must be visiting my grandfather, because my grandmother was sick, and there were people coming. I had one the prior day come up to my window because they couldn't find my grandparents' house. So I just naturally assumed this guy was a visitor with my grandparents. My grandmother passed away, and the next morning I went to my grandfather's side in his house. My grandmother passed away in the house. He comes out of his bedroom with a big box of photos. And he pulled a framed photo from the box. He showed it to me. I looked at it and I said, oh, I know that guy. I said, well, that's really weird. He had the same clothes on. And my grandfather's like, you know what guy? And he got extremely serious all of a sudden. That man with the white overalls and the railroad hat, he was in the yard. I was looking out over the yard while doing dishes, and I saw him standing there. I thought he was visiting. And my grandfather said, you saw this man and this framed photo in the yard. I said, yes, I did. My grandfather said, you couldn't have possibly seen this man. I said, but I did. I did see the man. He was in the yard. And my grandfather sat down, and he pressed on my shoulder and told me to have a seat. I sat down. Now, there were a couple of relatives at the time, so they sat down too with their cookies and their coffee, because there were some cookie platters that people had brought. And he looked at me and he said, I want you to tell me again that you saw this person in the yard. I said, I'm not lying. I saw the person in the yard. He was wearing the same white overalls with the same train hat. My grandfather said, did you ever know this man? I said, no, I didn't know him. That's why when I saw him, I assumed he was visiting because Grandma was dying. And my grandfather got very sad. And he said to me, You couldn't have possibly seen this man. He died when he was 40 years old, many, many years ago. And I said, oh, well, then who did I see? And he said, I don't know. But that man was my father. When I heard that, I got extremely emotional. Okay, I never met my great-grandfather. I rarely ever heard stories about him. The only stories I've ever heard about him, I've said once or twice in my videos. I've mentioned that my great-grandfather died of a massive heart attack. His widow, who was my great-grandmother, she was a farmer, and she made greeting cards, and she grew her flowers and sold them to make a living. And my grandfather was one of many children of theirs who stayed back on the family farm to help her instead of going on to school. In fact, this set of great-grandparents is the reason I'm here today, because this wasn't anything I planned in my life. My grandfather built this house here for me because he wanted to fulfill a legacy through them. It was their dream to live here, right on this piece of land. I don't know what makes this piece of land so special. I really have no idea. Many of my relatives have passed on. I can't even ask them now. After that incident, I thought, oh my gosh. So I didn't talk about that anymore. Like I said, this kind of stuff really scares me. Even talking about this right now is actually making me nervous. So I keep sipping on my chamomile tea to hopefully calm the nerves, because that's not where the story ends. Back to the story about the man in the stairwell that I saw. That's unrelated to the man in the white overalls, but I needed to give you a glimpse into that to see where this may be going. The man on the stairwell, I've thought about it my whole life. I kept it out of mind. I didn't want to dwell on it. Nobody really believed me and my cousin, but we saw it with our own eyes. We knew it was true. Back in July, my mother went missing. Prior to that, she was talking to me one day. She doesn't live here. She lives around the Appalachian Mountains. I can't make this stuff up, folks. I mean, seriously, I can't make this stuff up, okay? I asked her one day, did you know the Appalachian Mountains are haunted? And my mom said, what are you talking about? I said, no, I'm seeing it all over the place, that there's a lot of people that say that the Appalachian Mountains are haunted. Personally, I don't live there. I don't live near there. I never even heard of the Appalachian Mountains. I'm being quite honest here. My mother said, well, I've never heard that, and I live right here. And I said, oh, okay. I don't know. And then somehow the conversation led to my grandmother that passed away. We got talking about her father. My grandmother grew up with my granny. My granny was a single mother. My grandmother told stories about how shoes were scarce, and she went barefoot as a child for a while until my granny got rations to buy the shoes. I guess they got coupons for shoes. When I was growing up, my grandmother always hung a stocking, and she only ever put one orange and one apple in it. And she explained to me every Christmas, I'm not doing that to be mean. I'm doing it so you don't forget where you came from. I said, I don't understand what you're trying to tell me. Now, mind you, I was a child. And she said, my life was extremely difficult as a coal miner's daughter, and he abandoned Granny to go with other women and have more children. I didn't know her father. I had never met her father. Her father passed away long before I was on Earth. He was a coal miner. That's all I knew. I also knew that Granny and him had separated after the birth of my grandmother. And Granny, when I was growing up, was married to a military veteran for many, many years and then came to live with us. That's all I knew about the whole situation. July 2025, as I'm talking to my mother tells me that my grandmother's father was a coal miner, which I already knew. And as we got talking into the conversation, we got talking about strange things, the paranormal, and the thing that happened to me when I was a child with my cousin, with the man laying on the stairs. Now, why this is so impactful to me and why I was so encouraged to tell this story is because what I didn't realize was my grandmother's father was not just a coal miner, but he was a coal miner in the Appalachian Mountains. I had no idea. I am completely dumbfounded about this. Really, I am. I don't know anything about the geography or the history other than what I just found out recently. When I went on to explain to my mother, this man had jeans that were rolled at the bottom, a sweatshirt, and he had these streaks that looked like charcoal, that looked like filth. I thought maybe he was a homeless person. And my mother said, that's what your grandmother's father dressed like. He always wore dirty pants, he always wore dirty sweatshirts, and he always had filth all over him because he was a coal miner. I said, well, that makes sense now, because when I went to church and the woman was putting charcoal on everybody's face, that's what he looked like he was covered in charcoal. I never put it together. And she said, yes, in fact, the jeans he always wore rolled up at the bottom. And I thought, wait a minute, Mom, are you telling me that I saw an apparition that looked like Grandma's dad? And my mother said, that's what it sounds like. And I said, wait a minute. Did he ever come here? And my mother said, which I had no idea about, my mother said that he visited my grandmother after her and my grandfather met and started a family and moved here. He visited her here at the same house where she died, at the same house where I saw an apparition that apparently looks like him on the stairwell. And I was like, okay, this is getting creepy now, because that's the second time I've had this experience where I've seen somebody that resembles somebody that I've never met. That's getting really creepy. I don't know if you can see it in the camera or hear it in the background, but as I've been telling the story, the wind is blowing harder. Coincidence? I don't know. This is what freaks me out about this area. My mother disappearing is unrelated totally. It turned out that she wandered off because she had a issue with dementia. Sadly, she's better now. She's back home and she's doing well. I no longer talk with her about these things though, because we stick to things that we want her to remember. I believe, even though I don't believe in ghosts per se, after reading and watching things on the Appalachian Mountains, I have since learned that things, ancient things, I don't know what you want to call them. My belief is they're demons of some sort. I don't know. I'm not from there. I don't have any clue about any of this. I believe something is here because of the connection with my grandmother and her father being from there. So please correct me if I'm wrong. These are 100% true stories. I am not trying to just say this stuff just to get views or anything like that. This is actually stuff that happened to me. There's nothing to debunk here. These things happen to me. Okay, I don't have pictures of what happened. I'm just telling you from my memory what happened. I just wonder, and I'm putting this out there because I do really want to know, what is it with the Appalachian Mountains? I don't know. Could it be a connection or could it be a coincidence? Do you have any light to shed on this? Now, another thing is, I am not talking about this at night for a reason. Last night I was sitting on my couch. I was getting ready to come out here and film. It wasn't windy. It was the perfect night. It was still, it was totally dark out here. I would have literally needed a spotlight to have any light to see, to film this, okay? As I was telling the people in my household that I was going to be doing this last night, all of a sudden I heard a noise on my stairwell. I don't know if it was one of my cats playing. I didn't see any cat playing. Another coincidence, probably, okay? But something felt off. And then my orange tabby cat, he was the only one in the living room at the time. The rest of the cats were elsewhere. He stood at the bottom of the staircase and just stared straight up. Whether you believe in it or not, it's okay, you know? But it scared me so bad because I know people say, don't talk about that stuff or it will happen. That's why I didn't film this at night. But behind me, picture if the lights were out, the stillness. It would be tall trees. It would be me, darkness, possibly, if there were no clouds, some light from stars and the moon. And that's all that it would be. It would be still and spooky. That's why I'm talking about in the daytime. And I really, really want to know what you think is going on here. Do you think it's a coincidence? Please let me know in the comments below. Have a wonderful and safe October 31st, everyone. Take care. Thanks for watching.